Hey, everybody, and welcome to Between Two Moose, a show where we talk about trends and topics in teaching and learning tied to technology. I'm your co-host, Chris Sessums, Director of Academic Affairs at D2L, and I'm joined by my co-host, Kenneth Chapman, who is Vice President of Market Research at D2L. Ken, so good to see you.
Good to see you too, Chris. And you've got like a Clapton vibe going on today, like rock and roll background. So I'm expecting to see a little bit of edge to you today, Chris.
I should be pulling out a guitar at some point during this our webcast here. But Ken, we last talked when the world was just about the world was changing very rapidly. Last time we met. And we started talking a little bit about COVID and some things to think about as instructors were moving online or teaching remotely. And I know you've had an opportunity to speak to a number of customers through our advisory boards and been meeting with a lot of folks. And I'm really curious to hear some of the things that you've been picking up from your research that you're hearing for supporting instructors teaching online or working remotely.
Yeah, I'd love to share some of that, Chris, for what it's worth. And on top of that, I've been up to my elbows in trying to get my kids' school online and standing up an LMS and their curriculum. So shout out to Deercroft Montessori School. You guys have done some amazing work over the last week, and thanks for everything. But there's been a lot of lessons learned firsthand from that, and I'm happy to be a little prescriptive about some of the things that I've learned and then I've heard from our customers and others in the space that are working well. For those that are making that transition from crisis learning really into thinking about how do you get something that's more sustainable, more equitable, and hopefully more long-lived as a strategy for teaching online, because we're all going to have these same backgrounds for a little while, it looks like.
No, that's so true. And before I jump into that level, Ken, I forgot to, and you'll have to forgive me. I just want to say, how are you doing? How's your family holding up in light of the situation here?
We're doing well. We're doing well. Everybody's healthy. We had to have a trip to the emergency room last week, which was not fun, but everybody is fine and okay from that, which is great. And probably like others, I just want to see everybody around me be healthy and respect social distancing norms. And let's do what we can to help our frontline healthcare workers. They're doing some amazing work.
They really are. And I'm glad to hear everything's okay with your family as well. Yeah, things are relatively normal here. My son that lives with us, he's in college and was going face-to-face and is now doing everything online. So he'll be finishing up the semester online, and it sounds like the summer semester is going to be online and the fall semester is going to be online. So we're kind of getting used to something of a new normal. Things are starting to I want to say feel a little more routine now. So we've gotten over that immediate sort of crisis. All of us have felt at some point something fluttering in our stomach or in our heads and going, oh no, is this it? But so far, knock wood, everybody's been maintaining their health, and
good.
And I'm glad that that's the case. I'm glad to hear everything's okay with your family too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I'm always curious when faculty are starting out you start looking at moving online. There's a lot of things to consider, and I know we talked a little bit about that last time. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I think that's most important to think about as we move in this direction is the I'll say the novelness, the newness of teaching online, and the anxiety that sort of is accompanied by that. Are you hearing anything from our customers about that anxiety or what they're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we're dealing with challenges that people are feeling and their emotional reactions to it more than we are dealing with a technology problem here. And it's not just for those that are teaching online, although I know all of you that are doing that. I'm learning firsthand just how disruptive and anxiety ridden that can be. But it's important to remember too that your learners are feeling a lot of the same anxiety as well. As much as we may think of them as digital natives and comfortable with technology, that doesn't mean that they're comfortable being a self-regulated learner. It doesn't mean that they have some of those those skills to manage their own time and to, properly interpret and fill in the blanks of instructions that they don't understand, or, what to do next. So, I've been, really thinking a lot about some of the ways that instructors are helping to plan through some of that anxiety and embrace it and represent that in how they're presenting their courses.
So,
Go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
no, I was going to say, when it comes to plan, that's one of my favorite words. One of my favorite 4-letter words is plan, and I love planning. My father was the son of a Navy man, and we were raised with this idea of proper prior planning prevents poor performance. I'll just leave it at that. And I found planning to be the one saving grace. I feel like when I first started teaching online was because I didn't know what I was stepping into. I had no idea how I was going to really do this and make it engaging or have a sense of community in my class. So planning, I think, really was an important step for me. Are there any specifics that you picked up along the way when you were talking to folks about planning?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a really key thing is to think about your constraints and the constraints of your learners. What I've heard is there's a lot of educators just trying to feel out the medium, are rotating to giving their kids more homework and kids feeling more overwhelmed than they had before. When they're ramping up their understanding, they're managing that anxiety too. And similarly, faculty that have dove into online learning haven't thought enough about or didn't have the foresight to think, what's the demands on my time going to be once these children start or learners start submitting their work and start creating that opportunity for me to evaluate their feedback and show that they're looking at it while planning the next week and while making all of the clicks and drags that are necessary to make that work. So, I really recommend strongly plan your time. Think about how much time are you expecting your learners to spend in a week in your course or in a day, however it makes sense for you, and look at, what are the schedule of synchronous meetings that you may have with them, Zoom calls or otherwise. What resources are you putting out there for them? Links that you're sharing, material for them to read, and what activities are you giving them to hand in and to show their work, and how much time is it going to take them to do that, and not just the work, but the process of figuring out what they need to do, handing it in, documenting it in a word processing application. If they are not doing that, it's going to take them extra time. So to think about that. And to do that for yourself as well. For every activity that you go and assign out to your learners, where you're expecting them to hand work back or to give them some feedback, that's a big chunk of time on your behalf as well. So you need to sort of account for those things. And if you've got more time in the calendar than the kids can manage or the learners can manage, and more time than you can manage, then you're going to have to take some stuff away from that. And that's where rethinking activities or just taking a mindset of less is more is going to be helpful.
That's really well said, Ken. I'm a big fan of that as well. I know I learned firsthand when I was teaching about, I thought I had to keep them time on task, keep them busy. And then what I didn't realize was how much work that was creating for me
Right.
as an instructor. And that's just as important as creating, time for my learners, was creating time for me to manage all that. So that's really well put. I'm glad you said that. Another thing that I'm always interested in, and it's been something that's been in conversation in distance education research for many years, is this idea of presence, like instructor presence in a distance class, recognizing we have this transactional distance, as it's called, being separated by geography, but we have a lot of tools to help bridge that distance, that transactional distance. And one of the things I saw, I think in some of your research, you were talking about this idea of presence in terms of showing yourself. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think, interfacing with the website or an online environment, it creates a little bit of distance immediately, right? It's not the classroom. You don't feel the energy, hear the sounds of people, see their faces. So when somebody comes into an online learning environment and they're greeted by their instructor, a familiar face, and somebody who's just as vulnerable as them, where you're showing this is my living room. Here's my kid's laundry pile, right beside me. I'll just get that out of the way there. That disarms things. It levels the playing field, and it creates a bit of that connection. And, that's not something that's just valuable to do once when you're introducing, welcome to the course. Now, move in and start dealing with the robot. That can be done throughout. When you're setting expectations for learners on what you want them to do for an activity, record a little video of yourself doing that. It doesn't have to be all typed out in text and sanitary or flat like that. You can bring yourself into that. You can bring your own energy and your own dynamics to it. That's really important for online presence. And again, be vulnerable. You're not going to be polished. Again, we're not in a 5-star hotel. We're putting cots in a gym right now. And that recognition that, this isn't perfect and that you're working through some anxiety and some learning on your own front, it will encourage your students to share feedback with you. And when you do create that forum to listen to your students on what's working, what are you getting confused? What should I stop doing, start doing, continue doing? Your students will feel free to give you more of that feedback and be more authentic with you because you've sort of opened yourself for that. And I highly recommend creating that closed loop process where you do talk to your students and ask them, how do you make this environment and things worthwhile for them? One of the things I hear really often from faculty when they've elicited some of that feedback from their students is really on being clear with instructions and taking the time to think about, what are multiple ways that I can describe what my expectations for students are? Can I put dates on things? Do I record myself in a video telling them how I want to complete this activity? Do I give them a couple bullet points out there? And do I create those instructions in a consistent way every time I want to tell the students to do something? So that when they want to go find information, they know where they can go. When you're starting to put material in a course online, you need to think about the learning management system kind of like the campus for the student. They're going to go to the campus to go and get everything, and they're going to come into your course like your classroom. And you don't move your classroom around in different buildings, and you don't post the things that were on the walls or whatever in completely different areas every week. And you shouldn't be doing that online either. If you always describe this week's activities are happening here, and this is where you can get that information in a very consistent way, it eliminates some of the questions that you're going to get from your students on just, what do I need to do? Or how do I need to do this? And it also starts to take some of that anxiety down from the learners themselves, because they have that clarity of expectation, and they know where to go to get it when the time comes where there's a new activity.
Boy, you said that really well, Ken. And for those of you just joining us, welcome to Between Two Moose. This is a show where Ken Chapman and I get to talk about trends and topics related to teaching and learning and technology. And today we're looking at, as you move online in this new world of online learning and remote learning, things that you ought to be thinking about, things to help you be a better and more present instructor, I think, are things that are really important to us and things that we've been looking at very closely. I've been doing teaching and learning online for about 20 years now. And it's one of those things where I'm finding my phone is ringing off the hook right now, pretty much helping people work around planning and what to prepare for around teaching and learning online. Ken, your comments about consistency are so well framed. That is super important in thinking about the organization of your content in your class. And another key thing that I just want to echo that you said earlier that I think is super important is this idea of empathy. And I really want to emphasize and underscore how you've been pointing out the importance of communicating with students and eliciting feedback from them, and that level of empathy, I think, is what is so important right now, especially in this uncertainty, in establishing a really strong learning community. And for me, that's been my goal all along when I teach, whether it's face-to-face or online, is establishing that sort of ground rules for a community that we're all in this together, we all share together, And my role really as an educator is just to be the lead model student. Like I model the kinds of behaviors that I want my students to practice as well. So that's always been real important. And you've been emphasizing that in your research, which I think is fantastic, because they are overwhelmed with so much stuff right now. And there's a lot of little things I know that you can do within a learning management system, any type, where you can really help students stay focused. And I know one of the things that I've heard you talk about before, Ken, is this idea of, you mentioned putting dates on things and checklists. I know checklists for me were super important in helping students know where they had to be and what they needed to do. Even though I had it in the syllabus and I had it in the course, I found if I created just one more little element of a checklist, then students would go, okay, I know for sure whatever Sessums puts on that checklist, he's gonna demand. So I found that was another really good strategy I used to help keep my students, so they knew what to expect. Because right now, the days are blending and blurring into each other. We don't know
Are they ever?
What day, what time it is. So I really appreciate the advice you've been sharing here.
Yeah, I mean, we've been trying to apply that. I've been trying to work with even the teachers at Deercroft that I've been working with for my kids' school. And we've been finding that it's, again, these practices of universal design for learning are coming into play, where we found it really effective. And these are younger learners, of course. But we found it really effective to create a checklist for the week with some daily activities that the learners can mark off and sort of have that, again, a little bit of that reward. There's a payoff mentally and anxiety wise for knowing that you're moving forward and you're completing things. So that's helpful to have. But we've also found things, again, showing information in multiple formats is really important. So while we started building out checklists, we started creating dates on when the checklist items should be completed, but also adding those into the calendar for the class. Some learners and parents may be more adept at looking at things from the checklist format. Others that we're finding are more adept at doing it from within the calendar. Fortunately, how we're setting it up, it's kind of done once from the teacher perspective, but people can consume it the way that they want to. Similarly, how the activities to be completed are being introduced. We're recording really quick little webcam videos for each of the checklist items, again, for that presence of the teacher and to explain the activity. But then in the checklist item itself, we're linking to the activity with its own instructions in it. So just trying to create all of those opportunities are along the way to align people on the same information, the same expectations, and to ease their fears about all of the things that are outside of this learning activity that we're actually trying to do through all of this.
Ken, let me ask you something about video. So I know one of the first things that we saw when we were looking across the landscape over the last few weeks was a rush to get online, and more specifically, a rush to get on video. And I know video can serve a lot of different purposes. It can be a very powerful tool for teaching and learning, specifically at a distance. But talk to me about alternatives. In your research, are you seeing faculty experimenting with alternatives to video at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think some whole organizations and some faculty kind of have figured this out and have been doing this already. And I think others that are in the Zoom world right now, or Zoom-ish things, probably are starting to get fatigued with this, or looking for some alternatives, again, that are maybe a little bit more equitable, a little bit more scalable. I mean, we know that learners prefer to be able to work on their own time when they're working online, and to be able to consume resources on their own schedule and to come back to them later as a reference. And that's something to be really aware of when you're looking at, meetings like this. Captioning of them to make them searchable is super important, as is being able to have it as a resource after the fact. But this crisis can sort of help us to question some of the things that we've been doing in the past as well. Maybe a lecture and a long form lecture isn't the best way to represent a concept or a lesson online. And if it is, it's best done in shorter format. Keeping videos and videos are great. Don't get me wrong on that. The presence in a video and the connection that it makes is invaluable. And it's by far the most common type of content we see. But 10 to 15 minutes is kind of a sweet spot, and not longer than that. You start to lose your audience, you get fatigued. We know people take less natural breaks when they're working online. So 10 or 15 minutes and add an activity, add a thought experiment, add something they do to post to discussions, have them, record themselves reacting to the idea that you explained. It can be a great way to work through some of the limitations that might happen in an online meeting. Your wallflowers. If you have a room of more than 15 people even, it's really hard to expect every single individual in the room to speak up and share their ideas. But if you have a little 10 or 15 minute, 5-minute video explaining a lesson, a challenge question or something to reflect on, and you ask all of your students, post 30 seconds of yourself in the discussion area, reacting to this. Again, use video to do that. It's really simple. The LMS will let you do it on the webcam. You don't have wallflowers that way. Everybody gets to see each other, and you may see perspectives and connections that wouldn't exist otherwise. And again, things that people can go back and look at as a reference and ideas that they can add to and layer on, and an opportunity for connection that can be more long-lived than just happened in that meeting itself. The other thing to really think about when we're looking at video and online rooms is accessibility. Again, I always come back to accessibility, you know me, but looking at bandwidth. A lot of you guys are going to have learners in rural areas that don't have high bandwidth connections. They're going to be turning their cameras off in Zoom. They're just going to be trying to hear through the garble sometimes. Mm-hmm. So when you're recording your lessons and posting them, they can be downloaded for offline viewing. People can take time to look at things and to post them, and it's a little bit more equitable access to being part of that conversation.
That's a good point. I've talked to several of my colleagues who are very good at lecturing, and they have a lot to say, and they say it in a way that I was concerned, how are they going to break it down into 10, 15-minute chunks? It's one of the most, sort of challenging things I see for some professors is being able to make that leap. And so we've been having these, I'll call them arguments, very, very professional, collegial arguments around, can you, is it more effective at 15 minutes, or can I do an hour lecture? And I found so much had to do with the context of what they were talking about, the field that they were covering, and how the pre and post activities, to your point, that they started with, so that it kept learners engaged at a level. If I'm going to talk for 40 minutes, I need to give you something that you should be listening for, or things that I want you to be focusing on. If I'm going to talk for 40 minutes. So I recognize it's hard for some folks to make that switch. But I know that the alternatives to, if you really, really must lecture for an hour, there are some things you can do pre and post, as you mentioned, Ken, and I'm glad you brought that up, to ask students to remember, keep an eye on, or listen up for this when I mention this. This is a really important point. Or give them cues as to what you think is most important for them to know within that time period.
Yeah, and Chris, at the risk of being overly bold, and you can smack me down, as being the real educator here, but it creates a challenge as well. Here we're talking about students that are learning online, and maybe you do away with the lecture. Lectures are a huge amount of work. And this is, I've talked to some folks about this. I don't know how scalable this is. You talk to me. But lectures are a huge amount of work for educators. There's a ton of work that goes into that. But, if again, right tool for the right job, but if your students have the ability to find resources, to analyze them, to evaluate them, and to present them in a coherent manner, maybe they can be doing some of that organization and that curation of a lecture themselves. And maybe that's part of the activity. Having them be more of creators rather than passive. Again, meeting students where they are. A lot of them expect to be creators online. And again, where you are, if you don't have the time to build those lectures, maybe there's a different way to look at those things. don't know, Chris, is that something that makes you angry to hear, or is it realistic under the right circumstances?
No, you made a fair point about sort of not generalizing and saying under the right circumstances. I think that's the key. I think it's the we forget that what we have here when we talk about technology and teaching and learning is this fabulous toolbox, right? And so while a hammer can be used for all kinds of different functionality, it's really best serves you to do specific kinds of tasks, right? So I would argue the same with the technology for learning, right? That certain tools lend themselves better to certain aspects as well. So Ken, I know we're running close to time here. There was one other important concept that I thought was important that we touched on, that I thought would be fun to finish up on, is talking about feedback.
Yep.
And the importance of feedback. And timeliness of feedback, especially now. I have as I mentioned, my youngest son who's in college right now, is just now getting back papers that he and homework assignments that he turned in February and March, and he's just now getting them back. So the feedback there is a little bit disappointing, and it is for him as well. But talk to me about what you're hearing from customers about feedback, and how are they addressing that?
Yeah, I mean, at D2L, we spent a better chunk of a year building a tool just to try to reduce the time to feedback for students, because we recognize just how important that is for student engagement. So again, I would recommend, as you're making that plan and making Chris happy by having a plan, think about, what do you have the time built in there to be responsive to students that are submitting, and to turn that time to feedback around relatively quickly. And it doesn't have to be, a massive essay written back to them. A quick recording of yourself, again, using video to create some of that presence, to give some meaningful feedback, to recognize progress, can be really valuable. Similarly, setting expectation. So again, in the same way that we want to set expectation for how instructions for doing activities and how students know what they need to do, you want to set expectation for how you're going to evaluate them and how they're going to be assessed, and even exemplars of work. And again, rubrics are a really effective way to do that. When you're giving instruction to the students, they can see up front, here is the objective vehicle that's going to be used and the different criteria. And when they get that feedback back, it's consistent with that. It's consistent with their expectations. It's done in that format that they're expecting it. And it's consumable. So if you're doing, regularly weekly activities that are using a similar rubric on, reading response journals or something, for example, that's really helpful for students, again, to have that muscle memory of what is my expectation, and how can I hone and grow along those different skills and criteria that are being laid out. I think that's really important. The last thing is, encourage your students to give you authentic evidence. Take advantage of the fact that they've got a phone in their hand, likely, and ask them to show themselves doing something. It creates a little bit of personality. It helps people see their classmates and know that there are other people going through this as well. And some of us have a workstation that's the corner of a room, and we're all getting by. It can be helpful for creating that community mentality, as well as, again, seeing what other people are doing and helping to grow by getting new perspectives.
Those are all great points, Ken. And what you were triggering in my mind as I was thinking about that feedback and ways to approach it, you triggered in my mind thinking about play and the importance of play in all of this as well. I think sometimes we're so focused on the academic nature of teaching and learning in both K-12 and higher ed, and we forget about the play aspect of it.
Yeah.
And to give ourselves some room to experiment a little bit with this. Like you said, try using the video or asking students to give you video feedback. Well, it can't hurt. It's what this media was built to do. and it's an opportunity to try it. And if it doesn't work, you can try it again, or you can move on and try something else. But it's I'm really excited. The only thing that excites me about any of this crisis is it's pushing us to try things differently. It's pushing educators to imagine how they do their job. And with the technology, you have a lot of different choices that you can make and things to play with that I think it's a great opportunity to play. This is a real opportunity for a renaissance, I think, in teaching and learning. So that's the silver lining for me.
Chris, I think that's the perfect final thought. Personally, I think that challenge to try new things and to play, have fun with it, let people be creative. You know, our neurons are firing when we get a chance to create something and share that with others.
Great point, Ken. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Between Two Moose with Ken Chapman and myself, Chris Sessums. There are lots and lots of great resources for educators that we have available for you on our Brightspace community page. Up at the top of the page, you'll see a big link that has COVID on it. If you click on that link, that'll take you to all of our resources. We're wanting to make sure that we can support as many educators as we can. And we're so thankful for everybody that's continuing to work on the front lines and support our health and happiness and well-being throughout this entire process. So Ken, you're such a bright and shining face. I'm so happy we have this opportunity to have this conversation and we get to record it for posterity's sake. And I also want to encourage folks, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them with us, and Ken and I will follow up with you as soon as we can. So thank you again for tuning in.
Thank you. Stay healthy, everybody.